Hi everybody, welcome to Colloquia Comica. I'm Leigh. Today we're looking at Green Lantern. Wow, 600 issues of Green Lantern, amazing. Probably more. How do they arrive at these legacy numbers? I have no idea. I'm very much letters, but not numbers. I can't count to save my life. But apparently it's issue 600. Um, I think it would be more than 600. Here it is, the legacy. So 33rd issue of the current run, but 600 in total. It probably would be more if I doubt this includes the Alan Scott run because Flash recently got to 800, but that is kind of conditioned by when Barry started. He started with 105, picking up from the numbering of Jay Garrick's run. So the Golden Age was obviously included in that numbering. But here, because they didn't do the same with Green Lantern, like back in the Silver Age, like Hal Jordan got a number 1. And I think maybe that's because like Alan Scott's Green Lantern only ran for 30 odd issues. So, starting fresh with issue 38, 39, maybe wouldn't have sounded so impressive as 105. Right? But it's just to say that Green Lantern should have more than maybe it's Green Lantern 639, maybe something like that, including Alan Scott. But doesn't matter. It's an excuse to celebrate all things Green Lantern. And coming out of KO, we've got the rise of Kyle Rayner. So it seems going forward, Kyle is going to be in the spotlight for a while. Yeah, Hal still taking center stage on the cover. Maybe things will change next issue. I'm not sure what they've done with his logo here, but they're playing about with it to some extent. Uh, Kyle's still playing second string to Hal on the cover at least. And Kyle as well has been through various suits of varying degrees, varying quality. You know, I'm determined to at least give it a try, get used to it. I really didn't like the suits they had Wally in. He looks great currently, because it's the classic look. There he is. I don't know what he's doing with this Green Lantern here. But, uh, you know, the standardized, getting rid of stuff that defines him, like the standard kind of mask, not that weird kind of, how would you describe his big, like cumbersome mask he had, but really stood out, really defined him. I'm not sure what's going on with these like green bits on his sides, but I'm determined to give it a shot. Uh, so, stick on your Green Lantern music and chill and let's interact, discussing the latest issue, getting into the details. What's it all about? Analysis, predictions. This is not just like some like little YouTube like 20-second I hate it kind of video. It doesn't matter if I love it or hate it. Let's get into the story. Yeah. So he starts off with the kind of classic mask, and the logo is still that kind of half and half kind of thing. What's going on here? Hal's got the double ring around there. I think that's maybe what they were going for on the cover. So this is picking up from last issue, like 599. Sorry, I'm going with the legacy numbering. I will always go with the legacy numberings. I just like the idea that these books have been around for a while, and you know, I just always prefer the legacy numberings. But you know, either way, it's just numbers. It's the story that counts, right? So is he talking about Carol? Because, at some stage, Kyle took off with Carol. That was a bit of a weird period, but, why not? It's a period they went through. But he's not talking about Carol, he's talking about the Earth. So Hal is putting the Earth back into Kyle's capable hands. And I like this idea because, Kyle hasn't really been around Earth since his own run. Like when Kyle's initial run got up to 150, although that's technically 100 because he took over with issue 50, 51. So after 100 issues of Kyle being in this more or less suit that really defined him as this new Green Lantern of the 90s, they gave him a kind of more standardized Green Lantern look. But one of his friends got beat up. Like there were, I don't know, like one of his friends got beat up, and Kyle just got he just kind of lost his faith in humanity, and just kind of left Earth. And it was originally going to be like temporary. He was there with Jade, who was his girlfriend at the time, but it gradually just turned into this permanent thing that he was off in outer space because the whole universe, once you go out there, like there's so much, you discover there's so much going on out there, and I'm the only Green Lantern left, and I can't just be Earth centric, you know. So uh, essentially, that run went. I think it got cancelled with 180, and that's where they had the Green Lantern Rebirth with Hal coming back. So basically, Kyle just that was it. He just basically never came back to Earth again. So he was always a member of the Green Lantern Corps out there. But like Wally, with when Barry came back, you can assume he's still out there doing stuff. And he had a few runs here and there. There was like a New Guardians thing where he was a character. He became Ion for a while, whatever that means. He became White Lantern for a while, but his run was so iconic because he's essentially the only one who has kind of been meant as a permanent replacement for Hal. Because in the 60s you had Guy as being a kind of potential replacement, and John Stewart also. But as the trailer for the new Lanterns TV series has demonstrated, you're just a stand-in teacher. You're not actually a teacher. You're just in case I'm training you. This is Hal talking to John. I'm just training you as in case something happens to me. But you're not actually a Green Lantern. So Guy and John were never actually meant as to be main replacements for Hal. Hal went through his kind of social awakening in the 70s, but he was essentially still the main Green Lantern. But when Kyle came along in the 90s, it was just like, this is definitive. This is an actual replacement. So he's the only one that has actually done that. The others have kind of always been peripheral. Like all the other Earth Lanterns they've introduced since, they've still been kind of peripheral. So Kyle's the only one apart from Hal that is kind of, if you think of it in terms of Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, whatever age, the modern age, or post-crisis world, like three generations. It is like Alan, Hal, Kyle, because there were others, but they were always peripheral. So it's nice to have Kyle back in this sense. But I think we always need I know passions run wild with stuff like this because people don't realize how the power that mythology plays upon us. And passions do run wild with these stories. People get into all sorts of arguments about their favorite or whatever. But I really don't think Hal is being sidelined here because, going forward, I don't get the impression Kyle is going to be the main Green Lantern like for another 100 issues or something. I get the impression this is kind of temporary. And and in this run so far, like this is of the current run for the 33rd issue, and Kyle has been having his this subplot with Superboy for a while now. So it kind of works as it doesn't have to be just one main Green Lantern. Which one is it? You you can. I think he's done a good job of balancing a subplot with Kyle and a main plot with Hal in the same book, but not just having them as separate stories, but as combining them into the same story. So I get the impression that's what's going to happen here, because Hal mysteriously disappears, and there was this thing like his name appeared in the Book of Oa recently, and they're like, "Oh, what's this mystery? We don't know. We got to find out." And with like Krona returning in some kind of defective Hal Jordan clone body. Like, how is that going to play into all of this? Is that why Hal Jordan is in the Book of Oa? It's like, oh my God, Hal is going to get uh, blamed as the bad guy again, like Parallax. And then when he went off and took Krona's gauntlet the first time, when he was like, I have a bad reputation because of Parallax, so you can blame me. I can be the fall guy. And he took Krona's gauntlet. And that was an interesting premise, but essentially led nowhere because like the Green Lanterns just disappeared and Hal had to come back or whatever. But it seems like something like that is playing out with Krona coming back with his gauntlet in a Hal clone body, as we'll see a bit later. But I like this idea of just like drip feeding a Hal subplot that eventually will, I think the two stories will merge at some stage. But just allowing Kyle to have the limelight for a while, and it works. With them both having subplots. Like it would be more difficult with Flash because it always has been with Barry and Wally. Like it's one or the other because they look in suit. They look so similar purely because of that. But Kyle, they very much allowed him to stand out on his own. So Kyle is, re-establishing himself back on Earth, and he's with the Odyssey character that was in the Superboy subplot. And I really like how they're just like getting to know the real life. We can fly anywhere. But it's like, no, no, no. We have to get to understand our fellow humans. And is this car like? Is this a ring generated construct car? Because he's receiving a ring generated radio call from Corps leader Jessica Cruz. But again, yeah, he's enjoying being back on Earth. Like all the stupid things that you hate, but when you live abroad, you miss it. So you miss all these things about home. And Kyle, in his run, for a while he was in New York. So it's interesting to see how things will be different on the West Coast. So you get the mission statement here, like, well, there's these criminals that escaped from Oa. I think they had to release some people, like to help out in the last time that Oa was attacked. So obviously they all go to Earth, right? So he's checking. He's tracking down these escapees from the Science cells. So there's still this kind of idea that, Kyle at this stage is a veteran, of the current Green Lantern Corps. He's he was there from before them, like the corpse has been reformed and destroyed at least several times since Kyle was a Green Lantern, but they still like to play him as like they're doing with Wally at the moment. They're still playing him as young and naive, although like at this stage he has so much experience. But why not? So this Odyssey character, I don't know if she's a creation of Jeremy Adams or not, but I like this character. Like she's like some kind of time bandit or something, and it works quite well, because there was a kind of triangle of them when Superboy was here, but Superboy's no longer here because he's gone over to like is the reign of the Superboys, so he has to be in one of the Super books. So he's in Supergirl at the moment, not really doing much, but it's labeled Reign of the Superboys, so he's there for some reason or other. Uh, so this is an interesting plot line. Yet she's never stayed in one timeline so long because like if you don't have roots, who are you? What's your identity? The stereotype. You don't know where you came from, where you're coming from. But so with her, it's not even where she comes from. It's when she's, or not even time. The different timelines. So she has this total. She's totally separated from reality in this sense, and it's only these current stories that where she's kind of having some semblance of settling down. And so, of course, being stuck in traffic is this kind of excuse to get into some backstory for Kyle, which is interesting because like they never really did this. Like Ron Mars, like when he was writing Green Lantern with Kyle back in the 90s, I don't think they ever really gave him a backstory. He's just he was in the alleyway by chance outside a nightclub when Ganthet just turned up and hey, you'll have to do, here's the ring. But what was he doing there in the first place, right? I don't think they ever actually went into that or into any of his background. So they're very much retconning this idea that he was an introvert. I never got that impression. But again, I'm not sure if this works or not. It's kind of like playing into stereotypes of artists. He's not paying attention in math class. He's more interested in art and creativity rather than logic, and he's more they've done this with the other lanterns, right? That he's the emotional one. He's the one with feeling. Whereas, you know, Hal is the adventurous one. John is the logical one. Guy is the stupid, crazy, angry one, and Kyle is the one with feelings. So they're kind of playing on these kind of stereotypes. But when you have multiple lanterns, it's inevitable that they're going to, push their personalities in opposite directions so as to make them stand out at least. But they're trying to give him some kind of background. At school, he's a bit of an outsider. Um, his home life, and I'm not liking this reference to the fridge. Something else that doesn't isn't really, there's some important thing that happens involving a fridge that Adams has kind of not mentioned. Whether that's been retconned and is implying it never happened, or whether it's going to be explained in more detail later, who knows? I'm going to be patient and I'm going to wait to see how that plays out. But yeah, they're kind of retconning this idea of him being introvert, that yeah, he's extremely creative, and the way he creates constructs are all he doesn't just do giant punching bags, right? Um, which of course brings us on to another period of his history. Says Alex. So this is his ex-girlfriend, and of course they've got this idea here that they broke up or something. That he was just like totally into his work and neglected her, and she was outgoing, whereas he wasn't. That she was an extrovert, he's an introvert, and he just neglected her with his work. And this, of course, leads into like I like the paneling here. You see the progressive, the table mounting until it's just all this junk food. But I think this is how he's just explaining why Kai was in a nightclub. He's an introvert. Why does he go to nightclubs? Well, yeah, people go out, but they're trying to get the impression that he's not the kind of guy who would go to nightclubs. And he was actually there trying to make it up with Alex, although it seems it didn't work. So that's how he ends up in the alleyway and meets Ganthet. So his origin is tied to this idea that he was trying to make it up with Alex. And of course, we don't know to what extent their relationship is being retconned here. But I would assume they're just leaving that hanging for a future issue to go into more detail as to how that played out. But I can't imagine they would retcon that for no reason, or but I don't know why they've not mentioned it. But it's why he's here in the alleyway. But of course, artists have to be introverts. It's stereotype. But yeah, comics often play with stereotypes. In order to have clear character types, that's not how the real world is. But they always play up to these stereotypes just to have the characters as clearly defined as possible. Because the worst is when you just have them all more or less the same character. So you get the idea of like how he felt when he first got this thing. That he's seems like he wasn't chosen. It was just random chance that he happened to get it, and this is what led to a lot of his insecurities of I don't feel worthy. But again, it's one of those things that like he had no training. He worked it all out by himself. So sometimes that just doesn't work, right? Sometimes you just can't do stuff by yourself. We stand on the shoulders of giants, those who have come before us, that help us or inspire us, or we can go further because of their help. But he's basically on his own with this ring, and he's very creative. So it gives us this idea that he became a great Green Lantern precisely because he had no training, precisely because he wasn't conditioned in the way he's supposed to use this ring, that he was able to use the ring in a totally different way. So, there's no guardians telling him what to do. There are no limitations. The yellow impurity is gone, because I think later they retcon this as Parallax being in the main power battery in on Oa, that of course Hal had merged with, and so that means they're no longer affected by green, but by yellow. But that I think it's a good change because it was always a bit annoying. Like this ring has it can affect everything except wood if it's the Golden Age ring, or anything except yellow. Yeah, to what extent? But that was a good thing, a good change there. And he does look great in the original suit, but of course that was just the end of issue 50 of the original run, and very much the next issue he picked up the new suit. Uh, you get here a nice panel with all the incarnations, so you know that's how he looked when he initially got the ring and started to work it. Then with issue 150, they gave him this suit. So that's when he went off into outer space and became the space cop. You know, no longer was there on Earth. At first with Jenny, but you know that didn't work out either. Then they made him Ion, maybe, and he had a short series there. Then it was White Lantern, which is again going by this color scheme. Like white is all the colors together, right? So it's like a Captain Planet approach. All the colors, although he seems to have a green ring on his finger still. And then this kind of suit is a combo of the classic look, but with his funny mask. But now they're uh, going back to the original suit, but with some slight modifications. So then we get into like the main story that and like I was saying in my review of Flash 831, comics have to be relevant. They have to speak to us, and if it's a myth, it has its eternal aspect, but also its contemporary aspect, and reflect who we are, individuals, but also as a society. And a current worry is AI replacing people's jobs. So the Flashbook currently is playing with this idea of like how social media can easily manipulate us into doing stupid things if we're desperate for money. But why are people desperate for money? Because maybe they're losing their jobs because they're being replaced by AI. So this is a real fear that a lot of people have right now, and especially in sectors like the arts, because soulless people who don't appreciate the sophistication of art think that you can just get some random trash to replace it with. So like I don't know, if you just want a picture for your blog post, okay, you just click and you get some random AI slop, but it's never going to be the same as if you want actual art to hang on your wall, you're going to hire an artist. You're not going to get AI to produce a painting on your wall. Uh, so there's still something, the personality of an individual human being that somehow lost with AI, particularly in the art sector. But this guy is just like, yeah, I'm just going to fire all these people who are making movies, writing the plots and this. And again, it's a jibe at super. It's like a meta narrative on the superhero movie industry, reboot sequels. Like they're rebooting Superman again, and Supergirl again, and now we're going to get a new Lanterns TV show. Uh, so, to what extent have these things been done to absolute death? And you just get AI to produce some slop that is like a random combo of all the different stuff that from throughout the history of the series. It can't create anything new. You're not going to get any great new villain, but like some mad combo of all past Green Lantern stories. So, this is clearly a meta narrative. The writer talking about his own field. To what extent is this a worry in Hollywood among comic book writers or novelists of all kinds? Like now AI produced slop, and that's further ruining people's critical thinking skills. Yeah, because if people become the AI slop is parasitic on the vast quantity of stuff that we've put on the internet, but undiscerningly, like it could be any random thing by any random person. There's no critical analysis there. But then people get used to reading AI slop based up that's originally parasitic on actual human beings, but now it's parasitic upon itself because now people are just reading AI slop, and the AI slop is produced from other vast quantities of AI slop. So it just gets worse and worse and worse. And there's the issue that we are, if unless we're an expert in the field, we really can't discern if that info is good or bad. Yeah. So okay, these are fiction stories is another thing, but so there's the problem of creativity and originality within the creative arts, but also of non-fiction like sciences and humanities. To what extent do we believe stuff that is just a total mismatch of fallacies? So again, these are issues that we really need to be aware of, and comic books can help to some extent to help us to be aware of these things. But of course, he thinks there's some pest in his office, so you get this idea this guy's a total jerk. But this isn't just some normal bug. Is this like a yellow lantern thing? Is this like a parallax parasite? Who knows? But whatever it is, it infects him. So this is quite nice how it how the AI intelligence has literally taken over a human mind. Yeah, so yeah, this is a clear allegory here of that's what's happening when we read vast quantities of slop that's auto generated. This is what happens to us. Like it's inhibiting our creative faculties. It's overriding our critical faculties, and you really can't discern good or bad information, which was difficult enough anyway. So again, I was mentioning in my Flash review that Kilgore would be a good Flash villain to bring back, but again, with the current things here, this is obviously not Kilgore. It's some kind of yellow lantern parasite thing. Uh, but meanwhile, Kyle's moving in. She's not exactly his girlfriend. They're just buddies or something. Who knows? It's a weird triangle with Superboy. But he's gone off with Supergirl for the time being. So they're moving into this horrible flat, and of course, you know, why wait? Like everyone, it's on everyone's mind. Jay and Alan, Barry and Hal, and yeah, you need Kyle and Wally. So, maybe they'll have a crossover like 10 issues in. No, literally the first issue. Here he is. So just turns up, and you get the impression like, well, he's concerned about his buddy, but actually just Linda just made him go because he's offended that Kyle hasn't got in touch with him. But not everyone's as fast as the Flash. So he thinks he's lending a hand, checking up on his old buddy. Now that he's back on Earth, you're like, you've been away from Earth for years. I've not seen you for so long. I'm trying not to be offended. You never called. Like he's been back like 5 minutes, stuck in traffic. And who the hell's this? Never even met him. So of course, Linda sent him. But this is interesting how he just offers, like, you can come and live with us. It's like, is that going to work? We've got a spare room. Come and live in Central City. So he's trying to sort him out. This dumpster fire of an apartment. But again, playing on stereotypes of artists being poor, but also of lanterns that, like, I love this. Like, at least let me make you two lunch. Yeah, you're too stubborn to come and live with us. But you know, if you're like the other Green Lanterns I know, then you're undoubtedly neglected your finances and have close to zero Earth dollars. He's off in outer space for years and years and years, and obviously doesn't have a job on Earth, but like some bank account, backup. But like, I mean, like when they did the Justice League International, they had a salary, right? But Green Lantern Corps, to what extent do they support financially their cops, right? So if they are space cops, they need to live somewhere, and you could say that they're chosen on this path and they're doing it altruistically, but cops have a salary, right? And do Green Lanterns not have salaries as space cops? I'm not sure how that works, but this is what always happens to Hal when he comes back. You know, But anyway, they get back together. So there's a really nice dynamic here. They just pick, like a lot of relationships I find. I live abroad and I have my old friends from from years back, and when I go back, it's like you click, and it's like you've been gone for like 5 minutes. You instantly fall back into the relationship you had, and maybe you've both developed and become different people, but getting back together, you kind of revert to who you were. So I see them reverting to their old personalities here, like that going back in dumber times when they were younger and more. Yeah, they were both kind of. Wally was kind of more or less established by that time as the main Flash, but Kyle was still a bit, yeah, had a bit of the insecurity complex about it. But but Wally's like, you need a job. Why don't you just go in there and talk and ask them? And he just super speeds them in. So, is that how things work in Hollywood? Wally has no idea how to get a job. He's always just been handed stuff. When he first had his solo series, he won the lottery, but then he lost all of his money. Later on, like he just got the salary with Justice League International, as I said. He became a member of Justice League Europe, and that was an incarnation where they actually just paid them. Like you are actual law enforcement officers. You're supported by the UN. So he basically then did have what at first they were having him being cynical and like a jerk, like, I want to get paid for saving people. And then that actually happened with the Justice League International. That, yeah, they did get a salary, but why shouldn't people be financially compensated for benefiting humanity? Like that's how society operates. We were all experts in different fields, and we all contribute something and are financially rewarded, perhaps inadequately. So, but Kyle's sector is the arts. Wally doesn't really have a sector. He's always just been a hero. Yeah, recently, he got a job with Mr. Terrific, But again, based on his contacts in the superhero world, that he just walked into this job. So he's totally naive about how to go about getting a job. He's totally naive. He's never faced the reality that a lot of people around the world, including in the United States with the hardcore capitalism, that he's never really faced this reality of how difficult it is for somebody in his position that has no work experience, no qualifications. How does he get a job? Well, he's the Flash. He's got contacts. So he's just like, yeah, just go in and ask and just ask. And he goes and grabs Kyle's portfolio, so he's got no excuses. But of course, this guy has been taken over by Yellow Lantern. And I like this bit. You're pretty funny, you know that? Yeah, my kids say I'm cringe. Well, that too. So, it's what every generation gets, right? Barry was cringe to Wally. Wally's cringe to his kids. Like, I'm probably cringe to you guys. So, these are 90s characters, and they're the old guard now. Like these are old characters. But they've been retconned to still seem young, but they're still a totally younger generation. As the absolute Flash is total Gen Z Wally West. So this isn't a Gen Z Wally West. This is like, I don't know what you'd call him. Yeah, because he's been around since the 60s technically, but growing up in the 80s with the Titans is pretty much my age. But I doubt they would have him that. They're still retconning these guys to be early mid 20s. I would estimate like Barry is retconned at around early 30s, with Hal being around the same age. Hal, like, because they've done it several times where they've portrayed Hal as being older. So, uh, in the post crisis world, Hal was very much like he had the white sides on his hair. He'd gone grey. They were trying to say, I mean, John's later retconned that as that he'd gone grey early because Parallax had got into him and made him worry and sown doubt within his soul. Uh, but at the time, when that new Green Lantern book came out in 1990, Hal was just, yeah, he's been around a while. He's now a veteran, So they had aged Hal kind of realistically. But of course, now they're trying to make out that Hal is like young again. And they've done the same with Barry, like that they make him like he's wearing like sneakers. He turns up as a CSI wearing sneakers. Like, so, they're retconning Barry to be around Grant Gustin's age. How old's he now? Mid 20s, late 20s. But there's not that much difference in age between Wally and Barry these days. But if they're portraying Hal and Barry as being pretty young, and like how young are these guys? But I just kind of invent these ballpark numbers in my head that these guys are in their early 20s, but Barry and Hal are in their late 20s. But that's my just, I'm just making that up. But anyway, he goes in for the job, and of course, you get the anti-AI diatribe artists. We don't need any artists. Like, oh no, there's another annoying artist turning up because it's the idea of soulless executives that are micromanaging everything, and they think, they're just is the paradox that they're obsessed about the money, but you get money by actually producing something good, by producing something that speaks to people, that has heart and soul and intelligence, or is at least intelligible. And they're just pumping out disposable entertainment. And, to be fair, all generations have had disposable entertainment. Back in the classical period of Hollywood, there was also a lot of disposable movies that have been long since forgotten. Not every movie was like Citizen Kane back in the 30s and 40s. But is this idea that we don't really know what of our current period is going to be perceived as classic movies of future generations. We are not in a position to know that, but there won't be any if it's all just AI slop, like so. Yeah, every generation seems to think that the following generation is not as good. That's the same with comics or with music. My dad in the 60s with 60s music, like everything else is just an inferior copy. But in the 50s, they said the same about the 60s, and like people in the 20s listening to jazz and everything, rock and roll was like this great barbarism. And philosophers like Eric Fromm were also criticizing jazz. Like jazz is like the end of civilization. But nowadays, like jazz seems pretty sophisticated. Yeah. So it's just, I think it's just like certain people just like to complain, like because you don't feel it. It's the same with like the legacy characters. Like you're not connected to that character because you didn't grow up with them. So you're always going to be connected to the characters you grew up with, the music you grew up with, and that will make you subjectively perceive of a period to not be as good. But uh, it's subjective. But with AI, I don't. I'm not sure it's so subjective. It is just like total slop, and it's just totally. Like it doesn't mean, and it's in that sense that it doesn't mean anything to anybody. Like because of all generations, there is good and bad. Of all generations, there's disposable trash, whether it's movies or music or comics. But there's always something good that speaks to people of each generation, and the danger is if it's AI slop, there won't be that. And that will break things that future generations won't have it either. They won't have the thing that speaks to them, that speaks to their soul. So it's dangerous for young people nowadays that they're not going to have their myths. Yeah, we had ours, they deserve to have theirs. So, uh, but gets into this. I love this rant he has that Kyle manages to defeat this thing with this anti-AI rant. But it seems like it's interesting how he powers this thing. That it's, I mean, I don't get the the movie references that clearly, but they're very much he only has access to knowledge about movies. So, like a Green Lantern is only as powerful as their own imagination or their own will. Maybe will with Hal, but imagination with Kyle. Yeah. So the ring is only as powerful as the host who's using it, and this host he's just all movie trivia. So all of the constructs he's making are based on Hollywood stereotypes, and we finally see Kyle suit up. And yeah, we get to see Odyssey in action. Like, I'm not exactly sure what her powers are, apart from like time travel or flipping between dimensions or something. So finally, we get to see the team up and Excalibur. I'm not sure if that's just ironic reference there. So, this beetle, this gold beetle, this little gold beetle was the escapee from the science cell. And of course, Kyle has to outthink him with constructs. So this is it. I have something. I have my host's thoughts and memories. It's a machine to rule the world, which, is currently not in the sense people think that AI is like the Terminator is going to take over and make everyone lose their jobs, but AI is just going to crash the economy and ruin everything in that sense, and ruin our abilities to think critically, and as such derail society. So in that way, AI is kind of taking over the world in a more insidious way than we tend to think as it happens. But anyway, whatever you create, I have a catalog to respond with. So, it's like AI is just parasitic on what it copies from us. But Kyle is one of those people that he is parasitic upon. I'm not sure if they're making Kyle out to be a great artist, but but it's limited what AI can do without constant input from humans. If is why AI is so on productivity is so down in companies worldwide, because we're having to hire people to correct the AI. So fire the experts, replace them with AI, and then get people to do the drudgery of correcting the AI. Well, why didn't you just use if the AI is parasitic on the experts, why not just use those in the first place? You know, uh, at least then it's rewarding people who actually contribute something real and valuable and enriching to our society. So a comic book is a good medium to have this meta debate. So this is where the penny drops for Kyle. You've upgraded the studio's AI to make real world like constructs to destroy you. Yeah, to destroy me. But here's the thing about AI, it's only as good as what programmed it. So it's only as good as what's programming, and that's pretty limiting. You're just easing your ideas off the art of others. Or basing, sorry, I'm half blind. You're basing your ideas off the art of others, being parasitic, basically. Art that was made with blood, sweat, and tears. A real human being create the great art of the past, Rembrandt, Beethoven. It's based on real human experiences that made it great art. Struggle, right? So sure, it's cool. You don't have to work at it. You don't have to be original. You have an idea and push a button, and the most basic form of an idea will come into being. So it's very convenient as a tool, but going forward, we need actual people who can think and create. On People will still have those abilities, but if they're not rewarded for it, you know, it's not going to progress. The future generations won't have that life affirming experience, and just accustomed to taking it easy. Click a button, you'll have art, but you won't have great art. Great art requires some kind of suffering, and everything will blend into sameness. The novelty of ease will wear off. So, this seems nice at first, when you first get it, but pretty soon it's just totally soulless. And, you, when you first saw like AI music on the internet, like, oh, look, a new Beatles song or something like the Beatles. And it's a curiosity, but it's never going to have the cultural impact of an actual new song by the Beatles. So, there was actually a new Beatles song recently, and not AI generated. Although I think they used AI to extract John Lennon's vocals from some ruined tape or something. So AI has its place. Yeah, but but the issue is that this new Beatles song wasn't actually that good. It was some, like random recording they'd made and done nothing with. But even something that is like a like really bad, not exactly bad, but not up to the usual standard we expect from the Beatles, even that was a huge cultural phenomenon, like buzzing on the internet. And AI will never do that. It will never produce like music that means something to people. Like you get a lot of convenient slop, either art or music, but it doesn't mean anything to people, doesn't engage people, doesn't fill them with love and it doesn't give them that buzz you get. When there's a new album out by an artist you love, you get that an incredible feeling, and the way that art can bring us together as a society, and and you just don't get that, because it's disposable trash. Art, real art, the kind that took heart and soul to generate, will remain, while you won't. So you tell him, Kyle, take that. So Kyle overpowers the machine because he's got the creativity to overcome any construct this guy can make because it's limited, whereas the human mind is not in some respects. But so you get a nice meta rant there. And now he's just going to suck out this bug. And to be fair, this guy wasn't very nice to start with, but now he's like back to the jerk he was at the beginning. That maybe he should learn from this and hire some actual human beings to produce the things that mean something. Because the classic Hollywood movies will always be remembered. Maybe they didn't make money at first, is the problem, right? But these people are uh, literally parasites. They're parasitic, exploiting people to the people who have ability, the people who have creativity and are just out there doing it. They're out there producing, making stuff, contributing to human civilization. It's often the people that, for whatever reason, through their own laziness or whatever, their own greed has corrupted their innate creative abilities. They're going to become parasites. So that's the problem with the people who lack ability. They're always going to be exploitative of those who have ability. So that's where you end up with these corporate structures where like the useless are kind of at the top, exploiting the useful because you know uh, is what Yeats says, like evil never rests. But these people are inherently lazy because they haven't made the effort to discover who they are and what they have to contribute as a human being, and so have no real soul, and therefore they don't really have an inner life. They don't really have a real direction, purpose that gives them meaning and dignity in life. Therefore, they have to impose their lack of meaning, purpose, dignity on the rest of society because, as Superman well knows, the never-ending battle, right? So people like this are always getting into positions to exploit those who are contributing. So this is something that we still need to be vigilant about as a society. But anyway, the danger's over, and Kyle's just established, and it's time for Flash to run, Wally, run. But again, according to the cover, he's in the next issue. Like I think he's in the next issue too, because the next issue has them in the car, and Wally's in the backs with a milkshake. So is he gonna pop up again next time? Because it seems like he's off. But is are two cameos too much too soon? I don't know. So I do like. I'm not going to be too hard on the new suit. It's close enough to the original. The logo, they kind of fits, but it's not clear whether it's at the side or in the middle. It's kind of off center, not entirely clear. So kind of seems imbalanced. Before the logo was clearly at the side, and now it's kind of side-ish. And I'm not sure about the normal eye, the big gaps here, but again, I'm not going to make an issue with it. It's cool to have Kyle back, even if it's temporary. And of course, we have the we have the Hal subplot. So where did Hal go? He reappeared wherever. His ring's out of power because whatever it was that teleported him. But he's used to operating without his ring, and of course, he's got his jacket back. And Jeremy Adams loves these characters. Like, I think her brother is the Wonder Twins. I don't really know much about them, but her brother is with Aquaman in Jeremy Adams' other book. And the sister is with Hal. And it seems from one of the covers that Hal and Aquaman are going to meet up, because the same writer is writing both books. So, if that's going to be a crossover or just whether just Hal turns up in Aquaman. But I would assume that's where these two characters, these Wonder Twins, are going to meet up again. So again, I don't know much about these Wonder Twins, but Adams loves these obscure characters, just like throwing characters in there and putting in characters that have been forgotten, and just again, he just has a love of the history, and he loves to play with stuff, and he's fun. So we can debate his talents as an actual writer, as he's not the most sophisticated writer, but his books are fun, and comics need to be fun. I'm not primarily reading this for its intellectual rigor. It's a break from intellectual rigor. It can have intellectual rigor sometimes, but we shouldn't expect that to always be the case. And these books are fun, but Hal quite clearly is not being sidelined. They've got the A plot and the B plot, and at some stage this is going to develop into some main plot again. But it seems like whatever's going on with Hal and the uh, the Krona guy, Hal body is going to be drip fed over the next few issues. I like this. Like, she asks him if he knows how to fly. It's like, yeah, this guy knows he can fly anything. Yeah. And apparently they are on board some Green Lantern spaceship. So like, we're gonna find out where this goes next time. So this is the Krona guy I mentioned earlier. Like, there was some kind of cloning process that went wrong. And I don't know if this is the original Krona gauntlet that Hal had at the end of the New 52. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. because I've pretty much read all the Green Lantern stuff uh, as far back as Emerald Dawn, post Crisis, up until the current run. But I've not read everything in order. I've read everything in totally haphazard order. Back in the 90s, I pretty much picked up Green Lantern just before Emerald Twilight, and then I kind of stopped reading when I emigrated because, living abroad, I literally cannot get access to these books. Now is why like DC Universe is amazing for me because I can actually keep up to date with the current issues. Otherwise, I have to wait for the collected editions to be able to, to be imported because I'm not going to import every single issue. Uh, but the stuff like since Green Lantern Rebirth and the original, the Jeff Johns stuff and all of that, I've read it all, but I've read it all in haphazard order. So I really have no clear idea of what happened when. It's all a bit of a blur to me. But I like the idea of this Krona coming back because I remember that being an interesting plot line of going right back into the origins of the Guardians and the universe, and so it'll be interesting to see how this subplot plays out. And of course, they had the Kyle origin, so they have to have a little bit with Hal, kind of doing the same. So it's this idea that he was actually going to be a fighter pilot, but he just didn't want to take orders or something, and his mum was ill, so he disobeyed orders to go and see his mum, and he got fired, and that's how he ended up as a kind of test pilot rather than an actual fighter pilot. But he put his family first. He put his family before uh, his job. But the death of his father kind of is kind of something that gives him this fearlessness. Like, what I've already faced my worst fear. So there's nothing that can be worse than that. So it's giving him this it's where he gets this personality trait from that he's not afraid of getting beaten up. Yeah. Uh, so yeah, that's what we were just talking about him getting into the Air Force. But yeah, he decides this was in Emerald Twilight where he got fired. But yeah, he never got to see his mom. So it's the stereotype of heroes that they lose their parents. So it is the kind of juxtaposition that he saw his dad die. It was right there in front of him before his eyes. It blew up, which was in a way traumatic, but traumatic in the opposite sense with his mum, that he wasn't there. He wasn't there to see her die. He wasn't there to console her in those final moments. Didn't get this to say the last goodbye. So he lost both parents, but in kind of opposing ways that has played on his psyche and made him the man he is today. But anyway, that's how he ends up working as a uh, pilot, as a test pilot, and inevitably gets chosen by Abin Sur. He just happened to be closer than Guy Gardner. Is why he became the Green Lantern. And had he been an actual fighter pilot, maybe he would have been somewhere else, and Guy would have become the first Green Lantern of Earth. But again, it's playing with that. Is it fate? Is it destiny? Is it just plain luck? They're juxtaposing it with Kyle because they tend to suggest with Kyle it was total luck. He just happened to be in the alleyway where Ganth materialized. But maybe it's something similar with Hal. Okay, there were several fearless people in the vicinity, but Hal happened to be closer. So also with a little bit of luck. And I like this 600th issue because the stories do actually seem to be uh, uh, it's an actual story, contributing to the where the run is going. I don't like often when they have these anniversary issues where the stories are just kind of disposable. And yeah, it's nice to get past writers back, but it's all like they're not really contributing anything to the continuation of the story. Flash 800. Adams was like, "Oh, I'm getting kicked off the book, and all these great ideas I have, I'm not going to be able to realize." What he was going to do with Wade, the new kid. That just got left hanging. There's so many plots that got left hanging, and he just was like, "Okay, I just have to write this quick story to encapsulate the idea of the character." And you had a few stories like that tying things up. Williamson also with his Barry run, it was tying up a few things with the Tornado Twins, but they at least had the story with Spurrier, like introducing, like this is where the next run begins, and so this 600th issue, they've not just done disposable stories on all the different lanterns. You know, this is where the book's going. They have the A plot and the B plot with Kyle and Hal just kind of flipping for the time being. But I'm not anticipating that to be the status quo for years to come. I really don't think Kyle is going to be the main Green Lantern for the next 10 years. I anticipate Wally is going to be the main Flash for a while. Eventually they'll swing back towards Barry, but this is more to do with internal politics of of DC as a company rather than actual story, or what the fans want. Because there's no reason not to have a book for both of them. But I like this the way they're playing with it. That they both characters have a plot line within separate but kind of connected stories, and it works well. Oh, Dan Jurgens on art there. So it's good to see him like reprise a nice picture of how like from 0 hour. But anyway, finishing up, like the original artist and writer from Kyle's run, it's Ron Mars, I think. He's writing this, and just like this isn't really contributing anything to the main story. It's fleshing out his character a bit. Did he have any hanging plot lines that needed resolution? But it's, Kyle's back on Oa, perhaps before he initially uh, uh, went back to Earth, but kind of giving us this idea that Kyle was alone as a Green Lantern in the universe, but now no Green Lantern is alone, there. And giving us this sense of Kyle's importance in the Green Lantern Corps because yeah, these new rookies are like, oh, this is the torchbearer. And yeah, the artist still stands out. Romeo Tangal, is it? Something like that. And he still stands out as a good. He really draws Kyle well, makes this mask look great. But these other Green Lanterns, you know, they respect Kyle as kind of a veteran that essentially he is. We've not seen much of that because he's been off in outer space on adventures that haven't really been covered in the books. But so it's just kind of re-establishing Kyle. Because I'm sure there's pretty much we've had when was Green Lantern Rebirth, like mid 2000s maybe. Kyle has been kind of on the back burner since then, essentially. So there might be a whole generation that have grown up not knowing who Kyle is, but not a problem because like he was introduced pretty quickly. With like when I got Green Lantern 50, like the end of Emerald Twilight back in '94, whatever, I kind of naively thought, oh, like they've just given Hal a new costume and he's going to continue as Green Lantern. And naively thinking, yeah, like he's just murdered the whole corpse. Like, how is he going to continue as Green Lantern? But like that was a period when they were doing a lot of dark stuff with a lot of heroes and a lot of anti-heroes. And I just got the impression they were making Hal more edgy and he's not going to be a hero anymore, but he's still going to be Green Lantern. But he there was a parallel with Emerald Twilight that he when he was a rookie, he was the first one to go into the main battery and save the day. And in Emerald Twilight, he kind of repeats this same thing, but like just to take ultimate power. So you blew up the battery, and I just assumed like Green Lantern 51 was just going to be Hal continuing. And then lo and behold, you pick up Green Lantern 51, and it's this guy that just appeared on the last page is now the new Green Lantern. So it was very quickly introduced. And I think it was a shock because like Emerald Twilight was just like 3 issues. It seems like Hal just went off the deep end like really quickly, like the trauma of losing Coast City, and everything. I mean, it makes sense. The retcon does actually make sense. Parallax was doing it. That's why he went off the deep end so apparently so quickly. But having the grey hair, they also retconned as having been a sign that Parallax had already kind of got into his soul. But like Kyle just suddenly becoming the main Green Lantern again is yeah, that's how it happened back in the day. I picked up Green Lantern 51 and like, what's going on? It's like this totally new guy. It's a new day. But this time, he's actually being handed the torch is being handed on officially from Barry from Hal, and the same as Barry actually just handing it on to Wally this time, so they both kind of handed the torches back to them in this sense. But anyway, we'll see how it goes with Kyle back on Earth. And he's the connection between the old corps that got wiped out by the Parallax uh, brainwashed, possessed Hal, and the new corps that kind of came about afterwards. So this is just kind of this story is just kind of I think it's just fleshing out Kyle a bit for people that are like, okay, there's a totally different Green Lantern here that I've never heard of. But yeah, regardless of which lanterns people prefer, I think there's a space and a time for all of them. And I grew up with both, so I'm quite happy for Kyle to take center stage for a while because he deserves a bit more attention. So we'll see how that plays out in future issues. But yeah, I'm optimistic for how this is going to play out. And um, they're using this light in the darkness metaphor that, that's kind of what Kyle was, like when the light of the Green Lantern Corps was pretty much extinguished. He was the one light that was remaining that kept, like the Olympic torch, right? That kept the torch. Is why they call him the torchbearer, because he kept the legacy going in that period, and the corps was eventually re-established. But nowadays they're always, killing them all off and bringing them all back, or recruiting new ones. Like so. It comes and goes, but like the Earth ones never seem to get killed for some reason. Anyway, that's Green Lantern 600 or 33 if you prefer. Uh, so let me know what you think. Do you have any theories of what's going on with Hal? What's this subplot? What's it all about? What's he doing? Is how's this going to play out with Krona? Is there going to be some confrontation between the real Hal? Is this clone Hal going to give Hal a bad reputation again? How are these plots going to reconcile perhaps in the long term? How long do you think Kyle's going to be around? Is he going to be the after like a year or so? Maybe they'll flip them back round again with Kyle still being there, but having the subplot. I suppose, like all things, it comes down to the the money. Does it sell? So yeah, pick up the book, pick it up, support DC Comics, subscribe to DC Universe, buy the original comics if you can, uh, pick up the graphic novels if you can't. But we should really, if we want to see this art, we carry on. We need to make sure it succeeds financially. So be sure to buy it in one form or another. Support the comics. Yeah. So anyway, I'll be back with another review. I'm not sure I'll be reviewing everything going forward, but like my main favorites: Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, maybe Justice League. But the main thing here is deep dives, not just me like complaining that why I hate it or something, not just describing it and then saying it sucks or it's amazing for reasons I cannot explain. Like getting into all the details, the legacy, the references, theories, where we think probably totally wrong where it's going to go, but mainly just putting it into context of where uh, how this references previous books. But I like the idea that these ones can be just totally understood on their own, in their own right. You don't need me to tell you the entire history of Green Lantern to follow this book. It's as we say that these days they want to make relaunch things every like few years or something. They don't need a new number one every couple of years. Every time there's a new creative team, they don't need a new number one, but they do clearly need to find that balance of uh, finding new readers while not alienating the old ones. But this has always been the case, like the 70s, the stories got more serious because the kids who'd read those wacky stories in the 60s had grown up and continued reading them. But you do need to find that balance, and that's always the case with any form of mythical storytelling. That it kind of has its eternal aspects, but it also has the aspects that are relevant to a particular time and place and culture. And so, this Green Lantern book very much uh, speaks to the current hot topic, hot potato of AI, and going forward, can we see Paramount firing everybody from DC Comics and just getting AI slop to replace all these creators, either the artists or the writers? Um, that could be a worry, because when you get a, a company like DC that has such a rich legacy and history, that you could just be totally parasitic on that and just like produce AI slop that is just crazy mishmash of what went before. I mean, we sometimes criticize them for this, like oh, they're bringing back Hexa Hammond again, or whatever. But it's how it's relevant to today. Is like the absolute Green Lantern. It's a different variation. It's not just AI slop of mixing up previous stuff. It's been done it, with care and respect for the legacy while paving a way forward. So, but I can imagine if they actually, produced AI, Green Lantern, Flash, DC Comics, Marvel. But again, you wouldn't need Marvel or DC to do that. You could probably do it yourself. Like get the ridiculous chat box to just produce me a Flash comic, and it will do it. But it wouldn't have any value. It wouldn't even have financial value. Like the 60s comics are like so valuable now, but neither like cultural value. Like you remember those wacky concepts from the 60s. You remember those socially relevant Green Lantern, Green Arrow stories from the 70s. You remember those as being important to the society and speaking and making us look in the mirror of our society. And we remember the very memorable 90s stories of, like it or loathe it, like what they did, the death of Superman, the return of Barry Allen, Nightfall, the breaking of the Bat, how becoming Parallax, Zero Hour, this is all memorable stuff that nobody is going to forget those times. And if you just have AI slop, you will not have anything comparable. Uh, Maybe people won't hate it because it will just be totally, we'll have no opinion about it whatsoever. It'll just be slop entertainment, and people will neither love nor hate it. The important thing is that, like as what I said at the beginning, that mythology has that it it's in our heart. It's so deep in our culture that we care about it, and that's why people get so passionate about it. And sometimes that passion leads them into a lot of hyperbole, but that hyperbole, I think, is coming from a place that they care about this stuff. And so, when you see a lot of toxic hate on the internet about either the movies, the series, or the comics themselves, I think that's coming from a place of love that people are disappointed or something. But it would be far worse if it were AI producing it. So, as bad as some people think it might be, it could be a lot worse. So, you don't You don't like the current creators, go and create your own AI slop version. I'm sure it'll be a lot worse, but try and find out. I don't want to encourage that, but I'm pretty sure uh, we are overly judgmental of the present. Like in the 90s, we had the same culture wars, and now I look back and like, why were we behaving like such jerks? Like that stuff, whether it's the music, the movies, the TV, or the comics, they seem iconic now. And at the time, we were too lost in the passions of our culture wars, and so I think we've calmed down a bit more now and are able to appreciate what's going on while imperfect. Uh, but hopefully that's something we can just take some joy in this thing that we seem to be heavily invested in. In order to engage with it as art, as writing, as something relevant to the present day, while also continuing the legacy. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. As usual, I'm going to go on at length, but that is what we should be doing if we are discussing something we are passionate about. So uh, hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.